She thought she was invisible. She was wrong. Ivy was just the night shift cleaner, until the Mafia boss caught her dancing alone in his penthouse. That night, Jax Blackwood didn't fire her. He claimed her. Now, trapped in a gilded cage of power and secrets, Ivy must decide: run from the monster who bought her debt, or become the queen capable of saving him from the war. This story will hook you from the first second to the last shot. If you love intense romances where the villain falls for the innocent girl, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss a moment. The basement of the Blackwood Tower wasn't a dungeon. It was a shooting range. Soundproof walls, concrete floor, the smell of sulfur and cold, recycled air. Bang. The sound was deafening, even through the earmuffs. Ivy stumbled back, the recoil of the 9mm pistol traveling up her arm like an electric shock. The bullet missed the target completely. It hit the back wall with a harmless thud. Ivy lowered the weapon. Her hands were shaking. "I can't do this," she whispered, staring at the black metal in her hands. "It's too heavy. It feels wrong." Jax didn't offer sympathy. He was standing behind her, his good arm resting on his hip, the other in a sling. He looked critical, impatient. "It feels wrong because you are holding it like a broom," he said, stepping closer. "You are trying to clean the target. I need you to destroy it." He moved in, his chest pressed against her back. The heat of his body was a distraction and a comfort all at once. He reached around her with his good hand, covering hers on the grip of the gun. His skin was rough, calloused, warm. Hers was pale and trembling. "Widen your stance," he murmured against her ear. Ivy obeyed, moving her feet apart. "Lean into it. Don't be afraid of the kick. The gun is a tool, Ivy. It only does what you tell it to do." Ivy took a deep breath. She could smell him, soap, musk, and the faint metallic scent of his healing wound. She looked at the paper silhouette at the end of the lane. It wasn't just paper. In her mind, it was the gray sedan. It was the man who tried to kill Jax. It was Silas. "Focus," Jax commanded softly. "Stop thinking. Just look. Align the sights." He adjusted her grip, his fingers interlacing with hers. The intimacy was suffocating. It was more intimate than a kiss. It was a transfer of power. "Squeeze. Don't pull." Ivy narrowed her eyes. She stopped shaking. She borrowed his strength. She squeezed. Bang. The recoil hit her again, but this time, Jax's body absorbed the shock. He held her steady. Ivy looked downrange. A small hole had appeared in the paper target, right in the shoulder. Jax hummed, a low, satisfied sound in his throat. "Better," he whispered, his lips grazing her neck. "But you aimed for the shoulder. That stops a man. It doesn't end him." "I don't want to be a killer, Jax," Ivy said, lowering the gun. Jax took the weapon from her hand. He set it on the table and spun her around to face him. The look in his eyes was intense. Dark. "We don't get to choose who we are anymore, Ivy. My brother has declared war. He knows you are my weakness. If he finds you, he won't hesitate." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, contrasting with his violent words. "I am teaching you how to shoot because I can't be your shield every second of the day. And the thought of you defenseless." He stopped, his jaw clenching. A flicker of genuine fear passed through his eyes. "It terrifies me." Ivy looked at him. The monster of New York, terrified. She realized then that this wasn't about control. It was about love. A twisted, dark, desperate kind of love. She reached up and touched the bandage on his shoulder. "Teach me," she whispered. "Show me how to aim for the heart." Jax stared at her for a long moment. Then, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Good girl." He handed her the gun back. Again. For the next hour, the basement was filled with the rhythm of war. Bang, bang, bang. Ivy's hands stopped shaking. Her eyes grew colder. And with every shot, she killed a little bit more of the innocent cleaning lady she used to be. When they finally took the elevator back up to the penthouse, Ivy smelled like gunpowder. Jack stood beside her, looking at her reflection in the doors. He didn't see a victim anymore. He saw a partner. "We have a meeting tonight," Jack said as the doors opened. Ivy looked at him. "With who?" Jax walked into the living room, where Briggs was waiting with a laptop and a satellite phone. "With the only people crazy enough to help us fight my own blood," Jack said. He turned to Ivy. "Go put on the red dress." He paused, looking at her bruised hands. "And Ivy, leave the gun in your purse. Tonight, you are not the shooter. Tonight, you are the distraction." Ivy nodded. She walked to the bedroom. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt a cold, sharp purpose. She was going to be the most beautiful distraction New York had ever seen. The fabric of the dress was cold against her skin. It was red. Not the bright, cheerful red of a Valentine's card, but the deep, dark crimson of a fresh wound. Ivy stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom, staring at a stranger. The woman in the reflection didn't look like a cleaning lady. She didn't look like someone who worried about bus fares or grocery bills. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun, exposing the long curve of her neck. Her lips were painted a dark berry shade. The dress clung to every curve of her body like liquid fire, leaving her back completely bare to the cool air of the penthouse. But it wasn't the dress that made her shiver. It was the weight in her purse. On the vanity table sat a small, black clutch bag. Inside, nestled between a tube of lipstick and a compact mirror, was the gun Jax had given her. Cold, heavy, loaded. Ivy reached out and touched the black leather of the bag. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Tonight, you are not the shooter," Jax had said. "Tonight, you are the distraction." But distractions could get killed. The door opened behind her. Ivy didn't turn around. She watched in the mirror as Jax walked in. He stopped 3 feet away. He was wearing a tuxedo, black tie, crisp white shirt. He looked like the prince of a dark fairy tale. But Ivy knew the truth. She saw the way he held his left arm a little too stiffly against his side. She saw the sheen of sweat on his forehead, carefully wiped away but reappearing. She saw the tightness around his eyes that whispered of excruciating pain. The bullet wound in his shoulder was screaming, but he was silencing it with willpower and painkillers. "You look," Jack started, his voice rough. He stepped closer, his eyes traveling down the reflection of her back. "You look dangerous, Ivy." Ivy turned to face him. She reached up and adjusted his bow tie, her fingers brushing the pulse point on his neck. It was beating fast. Too fast. "You're hurt, Jax," she whispered. "You shouldn't be going to this meeting. You should be in bed." Jax captured her hand in his. His grip was firm, hot. "If I don't go, the sharks will smell blood in the water. Volkov needs to see that I am strong, that I am untouched." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. His eyes locked onto hers. "If they sense weakness, Ivy, the war ends tonight, and we lose." Ivy swallowed the lump of fear in her throat. She picked up the clutch bag. She felt the weight of the gun shift inside. "Then let's go," she said, masking her terror with a smile she didn't feel. "I hear the Russians have excellent vodka." The restaurant Le Saint was a fortress disguised as a dining hall. It was located in the basement of an old bank building on Wall Street. No windows, thick stone walls. The air smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and danger. As they walked through the heavy oak doors, the hum of conversation didn't stop, but the energy in the room shifted. Heads turned, eyes watched. Jax walked with a predator's grace, showing no sign of the injury that was tearing him apart. Ivy walked beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. She felt the tension in his bicep, hard as rock. She squeezed gently, a silent signal. "I'm here." The maitre d', a man who looked like he carried a knife under his vest, nodded to them. "Mr. Blackwood, the private room is ready. Mr. Volkov is waiting." They were led through the dimly lit restaurant, past tables of politicians and celebrities who pretended not to notice the king of the underworld walking by. They reached a heavy door at the back. Jax paused. He looked at Ivy. "Remember," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "You speak only when spoken to. You pour the wine. You look pretty. Let me handle the knife work." Ivy nodded, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Jax opened the door. The private room was small, intimate, and suffocating. In the center sat a round mahogany table. Sitting there, flanked by two bodyguards who looked like mountains in suits, was Dmitry Volkov. The head of the Russian syndicate was older than Jax. His hair was silver, cut short. His face was a map of deep lines and scars, his eyes a pale, icy blue that seemed to strip the soul bare. He was eating a steak, rare. The red juice pooled on the white porcelain plate. Jax. Volkov didn't stand up. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "You're late." "Traffic," Jax lied smoothly, pulling out a chair for Ivy. He sat down opposite Volkov. He moved fluidly, but Ivy saw the tiny flinch in his jaw as his shoulder hit the back of the chair. Volkov saw it too. The Russian's eyes narrowed, a shark spotting a drop of blood. "I hear your brother is making noise at the docks," Volkov said, cutting another piece of meat. "He burned one of your warehouses yesterday." "A minor setback," Jax dismissed, pouring himself a glass of water. His hand was steady. "Perfectly steady. Silas is throwing a tantrum. He will be put down like a rabid dog." Volkov chewed slowly. He looked at Jax. Then his gaze slid to Ivy. He looked her up and down. It wasn't a sexual look. It was an appraisal, like one would look at a racehorse or a weapon. "And who is this?" Volkov asked, pointing his knife at her. "Since when do you bring civilians to the table?" Ivy felt the insult burn her cheeks. She kept her face blank, her chin high. "She is not a civilian," Jax said, his voice dropping an octave. The temperature in the room plummeted. "She is my partner." Volkov laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "Partner? Since when does Jax Blackwood have partners? You work alone. That is your strength, and your curse." He leaned forward, the humor vanishing from his face. "Unless you need a partner because you are weak?" The air left the room. The bodyguards shifted, hands moving toward their jackets. Jax didn't move, but Ivy felt the radiation of his anger. "I am not weak, Dmitry." Volkov smiled cruelly. "Then why are you favoring your left arm? Why are you pale?" He slammed his knife onto the table. Clatter. "You are wounded, Jax. Silas hurt you. And now you come to me, asking for help? Why should I back a limping horse? I should just kill you now and take your territory for myself." Jax's hand moved toward his waistband, but he was too slow. The painkillers had dulled his reflexes. Volkov's bodyguards already had their guns halfway out. Ivy didn't think. She didn't calculate. She acted. She reached into her clutch. She didn't pull the gun. That would get them killed instantly. She grabbed the heavy crystal decanter of whiskey from the center of the table. Smash. She brought the decanter down hard onto the table, shattering the base. Glass flew everywhere. Alcohol splashed onto the tablecloth. The sound was like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The bodyguards stopped. Volkov flinched back. Jax looked at her, wide-eyed. Ivy stood up. She held the jagged neck of the broken decanter like a weapon. The glass was sharp, glistening. She didn't look at the bodyguards. She looked straight at Volkov. "You talk too much, old man," Ivy said. Her voice didn't shake. It was cold, clear. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. Volkov stared at her, stunned. "You think he is weak because he is bleeding?" Ivy stepped closer, ignoring the guns pointed at her chest. She gestured to Jax with the broken glass. "He took a bullet for me. He walked into a trap, took the hit, and still killed 3 men to get out." She leaned over the table, her red dress blazing under the chandelier lights. "That is not weakness, Mr. Volkov. That is loyalty. Something I hear your organization knows very little about. Jack stared at her. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Or a goddess. Ivy slammed the jagged glass down into the wooden table, embedding it deep into the mahogany. Jax is here to offer you a deal. 5% of the shipping routes in exchange for blocking Silas. She glared at him. Take the deal, or kill us. But if you kill us, know that I rigged this purse with C4 explosives before I walked in. It was a lie. A massive, bluffing lie. There was only a gun and a lipstick in her bag, but Ivy sold it. Her eyes were wild, desperate, and utterly convincing. Volkov looked at the purse on the table. He looked at Ivy's face. He looked at Jax, who was sitting back, watching Ivy with a mix of terror and absolute awe. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, Volkov started to chuckle. The chuckle turned into a laugh, a loud, booming belly laugh that shook the table. He waved his hand at his bodyguards. Stand down. He looked at Jax, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. You said she was a partner. You lied. He pointed at Ivy. She is a wolf. Volkov picked up his wine glass. I like wolves. He looked at Ivy. Put down the glass, girl. You have your deal. We will block Silas at the docks. Ivy let go of the decanter handle. Her legs were shaking so bad she thought she might collapse. She sat down slowly. She reached for her water glass, but her hand trembled violently. Jax's hand covered hers instantly. Under the table, he squeezed her fingers. Hard. It was a grounding touch. A silent message. I've got you. We have an accord, Jax said, his voice regaining its steel. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Ivy couldn't taste the food. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her lightheaded. When they finally walked out to the car, the cool night air felt like salvation. Jax practically shoved her into the back seat of the armored SUV. The door closed, sealing them in the quiet dark. The privacy partition was up. Jax didn't speak. He grabbed her face with both hands. His grip was frantic, possessive. Are you insane? He hissed. His eyes were wild, searching hers. C4? You told the head of the Russian Mafia you had a bomb? Ivy laughed. It was a hysterical, bubbly sound. It worked, didn't it? Jack stared at her. His chest was heaving. He looked at her red lips, her fierce eyes, the pulse fluttering in her throat. He groaned, a sound torn from his soul. You are going to be the death of me, Ivy. But he didn't look like a man afraid of dying. He looked like a man who had just found a reason to live. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was war. It was adrenaline and survival, and fear all mixed into one desperate collision. Ivy kissed him back, gripping the lapels of his tuxedo, pulling him closer, needing to feel that he was real, that they were alive. For a moment, in the back of that car, they weren't the boss and the cleaner. They weren't partners. They were two survivors clinging to each other in the eye of a hurricane. But as Jax pulled away, resting his forehead against hers, breathing heavily, Ivy saw something shift in his eyes. The relief was fading. The darkness was returning. We got the Russians, he whispered, his voice dark. But Silas will know by morning. He looked out the window at the passing city lights. The first battle is won, Ivy. But the war has just begun. Clean script, Chapter 13, 333. The witching hour. The time when the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. Ivy woke up, but not because of a noise. She woke up because of the silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against her eardrums. She reached out across the vast expanse of the king-sized bed, her hand searching for warmth, for the solid, reassuring weight of Jax's shoulder, for the steady rhythm of his breathing that had become her lullaby over the last few nights. Her fingers brushed against the silk sheets. They were cold, ice cold. He hadn't just left to get water. He had been gone for hours. Ivy sat up, her heart kicking against her ribs like a trapped animal. The darkness of the bedroom felt different tonight. It wasn't the cozy, intimate darkness of a lover's hideaway. It was the vast, empty darkness of a tomb. "Jax?" she whispered. Her voice cracked, sounding small and pathetic in the large room. No answer. Just the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant muffled sound of the city 30 floors below. She threw the duvet aside. The air in the penthouse felt freezing, biting through the thin fabric of her silk pajamas. She didn't bother with slippers. She ran barefoot across the plush carpet, then onto the cold hardwood of the hallway. The living room was bathed in the ghostly blue light of the New York skyline entering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was empty. The leather sofas were untouched. The bar was clean. The gun Jax usually kept on the coffee table was gone. Ivy spun around, checking the kitchen. And there, on the black marble island, sat the evidence of her nightmare. A single sheet of white paper. And a smartphone, its screen glowing dimly. Ivy walked toward it. Her legs felt heavy, like she was wading through water. Every instinct in her body screamed at her not to look, not to read, to just go back to bed and pretend this was a bad dream. But she was a Blackwood now, or at least, she belonged to one. And Blackwoods didn't hide from the truth. She reached the counter. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the marble to steady herself. She looked at the phone first. It wasn't hers. It was an old burner phone. On the screen, a video was paused. It showed a grainy image of a man tied to a chair in a dark, wet room. His head hung low, blood dripping from his nose. Briggs, Jax's head of security. The man who had driven her to safety. The man with a wife and 2 daughters. Ivy felt bile rise in her throat. She turned her gaze to the paper. Jax's handwriting was sharp, angular, hurried. It looked like it had been carved into the paper rather than written. "Ivy, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Silas contacted me at midnight. He has Briggs. He took him from his home. He is holding him at the old shipping yards on Pier 4. He wants a trade. My life for his. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking I should send a team. You are thinking I should fight. But Silas was clear. If I don't come alone, unarmed, Briggs dies, and I cannot let a good man die for my sins. That is not the king you think I am. There is a key taped to the bottom of this letter. It opens the panic room behind the bookshelf in the library. Go there, now. Lock the door from the inside. It is reinforced steel. It has food, water, and a satellite line to the FBI. Wait until morning. If I am not back by sunrise, call the number saved on the satellite phone. They will come for you. They will give you a new name, a new life. The money in the safe is yours. All of it. Don't argue. Just take it and run. I tried to be a monster, Ivy. I tried to be the man who felt nothing. But you ruined me. You walked into my darkness with your music and your defiance, and you made me want to see the light. Saving you was the only good thing I have ever done. Don't come for me. Don't try to be a hero. You are the only thing in this world I cannot bear to lose. I love you. J. Ivy stared at the letters. I love you. He had written it. He had finally said it. And he had said it in a suicide note. A scream tore from her throat, a raw, agonized sound of pure frustration. She crumpled the letter in her fist. How dare he? How dare he decide this for her? How dare he sacrifice himself like some tragic martyr, leaving her alone with his money and his ghost? She looked at the key taped to the paper. The panic room. A steel box where she could hide while he bled out on a dirty floor. It was the logical choice. It was the safe choice. It was the choice the old Ivy, the cleaning lady who kept her head down, would have made. But that Ivy was dead. She had died the night Jax Blackwood looked at her across a crowded room and claimed her. Ivy looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't see a victim. She didn't see a survivor. She saw a woman who had held a gun in a basement and learned to shoot. She saw a woman who had stared down a Russian mobster and lied to his face to save the man she loved. I am not your property to be stored away, Jax, she hissed at the empty room. And I am not a widow. Not yet. She turned and ran to the bedroom. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't look for the money. She went straight to the closet. She threw off the silk pajamas, kicking them into the corner. They were soft, weak. She grabbed a pair of black tactical pants she had bought after the shooting lessons. She pulled on a thick, dark hoodie. She laced up her heavy combat boots, tying the knots tight. She went to the bedside table. She opened the drawer. The gun was there. The spare clip was there. She picked it up. It was heavy, cold, and terrifying. But it felt familiar now. It felt like an extension of her hand. She checked the safety. She shoved it into the waistband of her pants, against the small of her back. She walked back to the kitchen. She picked up the burner phone with the image of Briggs. She looked at the timestamp on the video. 2:00 a.m. Jax had left over an hour ago. He was probably already there. He was probably already bleeding. Ivy grabbed the keys to the sedan, the unremarkable gray car they kept for emergencies. She stood by the door of the penthouse. She looked back one last time at the luxury, the safety, the golden cage he had built for her. Then she looked at the panic room door, hidden behind the bookshelf. "If I go in there, I survive," she whispered. "But I die inside." She turned her back on safety. She opened the front door. The hallway was quiet. The elevator was waiting. Ivy stepped in. She pressed the button for the garage. As the metal box descended, taking her down into the belly of the beast, she made a promise. Jax Blackwood had gone to Pier 4 to die. She was going there to remind him that he didn't own death. And if Silas thought he could take her monster away from her, he was about to learn that the cleaning lady knew exactly how to take out the trash. The elevator dinged. The garage was dark, concrete, echoing. Ivy walked toward the car, her footsteps echoing like drumbeats of war. She unlocked the door. She climbed in. She turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, a hungry, angry growl. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. There was only cold, hard rage. She shifted the gear into drive. She slammed her foot on the gas. The car screeched out of the garage, bursting into the rainy New York night. Ivy gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "Hang on, Jax," she whispered to the wind. "The Queen is coming." Pier 4 was a graveyard of steel. Massive shipping cranes loomed overhead like the skeletons of prehistoric beasts, their rusted necks bent against the storm. The rain here didn't fall. It was driven sideways by a fierce wind that smelled of Atlantic salt, diesel fumes, and decay. Ivy killed the headlights of the gray sedan a block away. She let the car roll to a silent stop behind a stack of abandoned pallets. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Her breath fogged the windshield. Inside the car, it was dry, safe. Outside, hell was waiting. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. A strange, cold calm had settled over her, the numbness of a soldier before the first shot is fired. She reached behind her back and pulled the gun from her waistband. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She shoved the spare clip into her pocket. She pulled her hood up, hiding her face in shadow. Ivy opened the car door. The wind hit her instantly, screaming in her ears, tearing at her clothes. She slammed the door shut and ran. She moved through the shadows of the shipping containers, a small, dark figure in a world of giants. She didn't know military tactics. She didn't know stealth, but she knew how to be invisible. She had spent her whole life being the cleaning lady, the one nobody noticed in the corner of the room. Tonight, that invisibility was her superpower. She reached the main warehouse. The massive sliding doors were cracked open a few feet. Bright, harsh halogen light spilled out onto the wet asphalt, cutting through the rain. Ivy pressed her back against the cold, corrugated metal of the wall. She slid toward the opening. She peeked inside. The sight that met her eyes almost made her knees buckle. The warehouse was a cavernous space, echoing with the sound of rain hammering on the tin roof. In the center, a circle of cars had been arranged to create an arena of light. And there, in the middle of the glare, was Jax. He was on his knees. His hands were zip-tied behind his back to a metal chair. He looked ruined. His tuxedo shirt was torn open, revealing the bandages on his shoulder, which were now soaked fresh red. His face was swollen, blood dripping steadily from a cut above his eye, painting a dark line down his cheek to his jaw. But his head was up. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking straight ahead, his eyes burning with a defiance that even torture couldn't extinguish. Standing over him was a man who looked like Jax's reflection in a broken mirror. Silas Blackwood. He wore the same expensive suit, but on him, it looked wrong. He held a chrome-plated pistol loosely in his hand, tapping the barrel against his own thigh. Behind them, in the shadows, Ivy saw Briggs. The bodyguard was slumped against a crate, unconscious, a dark pool forming beneath him. But his chest was rising and falling. Alive. Ivy's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4. She needed to move. But there were 2 other men, guards with assault rifles, standing by the cars. If she missed, if she panicked, Jax would die before his body hit the floor. She needed to get closer. Ivy crept inside, using the stacks of crates as cover. She moved silently, her wet boots making no sound on the concrete. She got within 20 yards. She hid behind a blue generator. She could hear their voices now. "You're pathetic, brother," Silas's voice echoed, distorted by the vast space. "You built this empire. You control the city. And you threw it all away for a girl?" Jax spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "I didn't throw it away, Silas. I outgrew it. You want the crown? Take it. It's heavy and it's cold. Just let Briggs go." Silas laughed. It was a high, unstable sound. "Oh, I'll take the crown. But I want the jewel too." He leaned down, grabbing Jax's hair, forcing his head back. The chrome gun pressed into Jax's temple. "Where is she, Jax? Where did you hide the little cleaning lady? The panic room? The safe house in the Hamptons?" Jax smiled, a bloody, terrifying grin. "She's gone, Silas. She's halfway to Canada by now. You'll never find her." Silas struck him, a brutal pistol whip across the face. Jax's head snapped to the side. He groaned, a low sound of agony that tore through Ivy's heart. "Liar!" Silas screamed. "You wouldn't let her leave. You're too possessive." Silas paced back and forth, agitated. "It doesn't matter. I'll find her. And when I do, I'm going to make her scream your name while you watch." Jax's demeanor changed. The calm evaporated. He struggled against the zip ties, the metal chair screeching against the concrete. "If you touch her, Silas, I will drag you to hell with me." Silas stopped pacing. He turned back to Jax. He raised the gun. He aimed it right between Jax's eyes. "Save me a seat in hell, brother." He pulled the hammer back. Click. Ivy stepped out. She didn't think. She didn't breathe. She stepped into the halo of light, 2 hands on the gun, feet shoulder-width apart, shoulders locked, just like he taught her. "Hey!" she shouted. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a command. It rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the noise of the rain. Silas froze. He turned his head, confused. The 2 guards raised their rifles, but they hesitated, surprised to see a girl in a hoodie standing alone in the open. Silas saw her. His eyes widened. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, well. Speak of the devil, and the mouse appears." Jax jerked his head around. When he saw her, the blood drained from his face. For the first time all night, true terror flooded his eyes. "Ivy, run!" he roared. "Get out of here." Ivy didn't run. She didn't look at Jax. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she would break. She locked her eyes on Silas, on the gun in his hand, the gun that was pointed at her love. "I'm not a mouse, Silas," Ivy said. Her voice trembled, but her hands were stone. "I'm the woman who is going to end you." Silas laughed. He turned his body fully toward her, lowering his gun slightly, arrogant. "You? You're going to shoot me? You're shaking, darling. You've never fired a gun in your life. Go home and scrub some floors. Jack struggled violently against the chair. No. Ivy, don't. Silas raised his gun again. This time he pointed it at Ivy. Drop it, girl, or I put a hole in your pretty little... Ivy stopped listening. The world narrowed down to a tunnel. All she saw was Silas. All she heard was Jax's voice in her memory. Squeeze. Don't pull. The gun is a tool. She inhaled. She exhaled. She squeezed. Bang. The sound was louder than thunder. The muzzle flash blinded her for a microsecond. The bullet didn't hit Silas in the heart. She wasn't a sniper, but she was desperate. The bullet slammed into Silas's right shoulder, spinning him around. The impact was visceral. Blood sprayed into the air. Silas screamed, a high-pitched shriek of shock and pain. His gun flew from his hand, skittering uselessly across the floor. Chaos exploded. Jax didn't wait. Adrenaline overrode the pain. With a roar of pure primal fury, he threw his weight backward. The metal chair tipped over, smashing against the concrete, snapping the weakened plastic of the zip ties. He was free. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the guards. He lunged at Silas. He tackled his brother to the ground. It was a blur of violence. Fists, blood, rage. The two guards raised their rifles toward Jax. Ivy didn't freeze. She turned her gun toward the cars. Bang, bang, bang. She fired wildly. Not to kill, but to terrify. The bullet sparked off the metal hoods of the cars. One shattered a windshield. The guards ducked, scrambling for cover, confused by the suppressing fire. Jax! Ivy screamed. We have to go. Jax was on top of Silas, punching him. Once, twice. He grabbed his brother by the lapels of his ruined suit. If you ever come near us again, Jax snarled, his face inches from Silas's. I won't miss. Jax stood up. He kicked Silas in the ribs, hard. He turned and ran toward Ivy. He grabbed her hand. His grip was slick with blood, but strong. Unbreakable. Run! They sprinted toward the open doors. Behind them, the guards started firing. Bullets pinged off the concrete, kicking up dust around their feet. Ivy didn't look back. She ran harder than she had ever run in her life. They burst out into the rain. The cold water hit them like a physical blow, washing away the heat of the warehouse. They reached the gray sedan. Jax threw open the passenger door for her, shoving her inside before diving into the driver's seat. He started the car. A bullet shattered the rear window, spraying glass over the back seat. Jax slammed his foot on the gas. The car screeched, fishtailing on the wet asphalt before gripping the road and launching forward. They tore out of the pier, leaving the warehouse, the brother, and the old life behind in the rearview mirror. Jax drove like a madman, weaving through the industrial streets, putting distance between them and death. Only when the warehouse was a speck in the distance did he slow down. The silence inside the car was deafening. Ivy sat frozen, the gun still clutched in her lap. Her ears were ringing. Her chest hurt from breathing too hard. Then she felt a hand. Jax reached across the console. He placed his hand over hers on the gun. He gently pried her fingers loose, taking the weapon and placing it in the door pocket. Then, he took her hand. He lifted it to his lips. He pressed a kiss into her palm, right where the gun had been. He kept her hand pressed against his cheek. Ivy looked at him. His face was a mess of bruises and blood. His eye was swelling shut. But he was looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. You came back, he whispered, his voice broken. I told you to run, and you came back. Ivy leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes, feeling his warmth. I told you, Jax, she murmured, a tear finally escaping to track through the grime on her face. I'm not the cleaning lady anymore. Jax squeezed her hand. No, he agreed softly. You're not. You're the queen. The car sped into the night, carrying two broken people who had just found out that together, they were unbreakable. The gray sedan tore through the night, a metal ghost cutting through the storm. Jax drove with one hand. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood soaking through the makeshift bandages and staining the fine leather of the steering wheel. He was pale. Even in the flashing shadows of the streetlights, Ivy could see the gray cast to his skin. The adrenaline that had fueled his fight at the warehouse was fading, leaving behind the crushing weight of physical trauma. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled to her chest. She watched him. She watched the way his jaw clenched with every bump in the road. She watched the sweat beading on his forehead. She watched his eyes checking the mirrors every 3 seconds, a reflex honed by years of war. He was dying. Maybe not this second, maybe not this minute, but he was losing too much blood. "Jax," Ivy whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine and the rain. "Pull over. Let me drive." "No," Jax gritted out. His voice was like gravel. "We're not safe yet. Silas has eyes everywhere. The city is compromised." "Where are we going?" "North," he rasped. "Upstate. There is a cabin. Off the grid. No cameras, no digital footprint. It's the only place he won't look." He took a sharp turn onto a highway on-ramp. The car fishtailed on the wet asphalt. Ivy grabbed the handle above the door, her heart leaping into her throat. Jax corrected the skid with a grunt of pain, but he didn't slow down. Miles turned into hours. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the crushing darkness of the countryside. The rain turned from a downpour into a steady, freezing drizzle. Ivy kept talking to him. She knew she had to keep him awake. "Jax? Stay with me. Tell me about the cabin." "It's old," he murmured, his eyes drooping. "My grandfather built it. Before the money. Before the blood. It's just wood and stone. Is there a doctor there?" Jax let out a dry, humorless laugh. "No doctor. Just whiskey and a fireplace." "You're going to have to be the doctor, Ivy." The car suddenly swerved across the center line. "Jax!" Ivy shouted, reaching for the wheel. Jax jerked awake, pulling the car back into the lane. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Just rested my eyes." Ivy's fear turned into cold determination. "Stop the car, Jax. Now." He didn't argue this time. He couldn't. His body was shutting down. He pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder of the empty road. The engine idled, a low hum in the silence of the woods. Jax let his head fall back against the headrest. His breathing was shallow and fast. Ivy unbuckled her seatbelt. She opened her door and ran through the rain to the driver's side. She opened his door. "Move over," she commanded. Jax looked at her. His eyes were hazy, unfocused. "I can drive." "You can barely sit up," Ivy snapped. She grabbed his good arm. "Move, or I will drag you." Jax stared at her for a second. Then a faint, crooked smile touched his lips. "Bossy," he whispered. "I like it." He struggled to slide over the center console into the passenger seat. It was an agonizing process. He groaned, his face twisting in pain as his wounded shoulder bumped the gear shift. When he was finally settled, Ivy climbed into the driver's seat. The seat was warm from his body. The steering wheel was sticky with his blood. She gripped it tight. She adjusted the mirrors. She put the car in drive. "Sleep, Jax," she said softly. "I'll get us there." It was nearly dawn when they found the turnoff. It was barely a road, just 2 ruts of mud winding deep into the forest. The car bounced and scraped, the headlights illuminating towering pines that looked like prison bars. Finally, the cabin appeared. It was small, rustic, made of dark logs. It looked abandoned. It looked perfect. Ivy parked the car. She turned to Jax. He was unconscious. His head lolled to the side. "Jax," she said, shaking his knee. "We're here." He didn't wake up. Panic, sharp and icy, pierced her chest. She scrambled out of the car and ran to his side. She opened the door. She touched his neck. A pulse. Weak, thready. But there. He wasn't dead. He had just passed out from exhaustion and blood loss. Ivy looked at the cabin, then at him. He was 6'3" of pure muscle. She was 5'4". But she had adrenaline, and she had love. She grabbed his good arm and pulled it over her shoulder. Jax, wake up! You have to help me. Walk, Jax. Walk. Jax stirred. He groaned, his legs finding some purchase on the muddy ground. Together, they stumbled toward the cabin. Ivy took most of his weight, her boots slipping in the mud, her muscles screaming. They reached the porch. Ivy kicked the door. It was locked. Key. Under the mat, Jax mumbled, his head hanging heavy on her shoulder. Ivy fell to her knees, dragging him down with her. She frantically searched under the rough doormat. Her fingers brushed cold metal. She grabbed the key, shoved it into the lock. The door swung open with a groan of rusty hinges. The air inside was stale and freezing. It smelled of dust, pine, and neglect. Ivy didn't care. It was shelter. She dragged Jax inside. There was an old leather sofa in the center of the room. She guided him to it. He collapsed, dead weight, his long legs hanging off the edge. Ivy didn't stop to rest. She found the breaker box by the door. She flipped the switches. Click, click. A single yellow bulb flickered to life in the kitchen corner. Power. Thank God. She ran to the kitchen. She opened the cupboards. Empty. Except for a bottle of vodka and a tin of coffee. She checked the drawers. She found a first aid kit. Old, dusty, but sealed. She found clean towels. She filled a bowl with water from the tap. It ran brown for a second, then clear. She carried everything to the sofa. Jax was shivering. His teeth chattered, a sound that echoed in the quiet room. Shock. Ivy knelt beside him. She had to get the wet, bloody clothes off him. She pulled out the knife she still had in her boot, the one she used to cut his ropes at the warehouse. She cut his shirt open. The fabric parted, revealing the damage. Ivy gasped. It was worse than she thought. The gunshot wound on his shoulder was angry and inflamed, but it was the rest of him that broke her heart. His ribs were a map of purple and black bruises. There were cuts on his chest from the glass, burns on his wrists from the zip ties. He looked like a war zone. Ivy soaked a towel in the water. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "This is going to hurt." She pressed the cloth to his shoulder. Even unconscious, Jax flinched. A low moan of pain escaped his lips. Ivy worked through her tears. She cleaned the blood. She poured the vodka over the wound to disinfect it. She bandaged him with the supplies from the kit, wrapping the white gauze tight around his broad chest. When she was done, he was clean, bandaged, but he was freezing. The cabin was like an icebox. Ivy looked at the fireplace. There was wood, but it would take too long to heat the room. He needed heat now. She remembered what he said in the car. Body heat. Ivy stood up. She stripped off her wet hoodie. She kicked off her boots and her jeans. She was left in her underwear and a thin tank top. She grabbed the dusty wool blankets from the back of the sofa. She climbed onto the couch, pushing herself into the small space between Jax and the back cushions. She lay down along the length of him. She pressed her body against his, skin to skin. She was small, but she was warm. She wrapped her arm around his waist, careful of his ribs. She tangled her legs with his. She pulled the heavy blankets over both of them, creating a cocoon. "Wake up, Jax," she whispered against his neck. "Stay with me." Slowly, very slowly, the shivering began to subside. His breathing deepened. His heart, beating against her chest, found a steady rhythm. Ivy lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside. She looked at the man in her arms. The monster. The king. The boss. Now, he was just a man. A broken man who needed her. She pressed a kiss to his cold shoulder. "I've got you," she promised into the silence. "You saved me from the world. Now I'm going to save you from death. And when you wake up, we are going to make them pay." She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her. Outside, the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in colors of blood and gold. Inside, the war was paused, but the queen was awake, and she was ready for whatever came next. Morning didn't break in the cabin. It crept in. Sunlight filtered through the dirty glass of the lone window, dancing with the dust motes floating in the stale air. It was a pale, winter light, devoid of heat, but full of clarity. Ivy woke up slowly. Her body felt heavy, anchored by a weight that was both crushing and comforting. She opened her eyes, blinking against the brightness. The first thing she saw was skin. Tan, warm skin, marred by a dark bruise that bloomed across the ribs like a storm cloud. She was lying on Jax's chest. She froze, holding her breath, listening. Thump, thump, thump. His heart was beating. It was slow, steady, stronger than the erratic fluttering of last night. He was alive. Ivy exhaled, a sound that was half sigh, half sob. She shifted slightly, her muscles protesting. She had slept in a knot of tension, terrified that if she moved, he would stop breathing. She looked up at his face. In sleep, the monster of New York looked deceptively innocent. The lines of pain around his eyes had smoothed out. His mouth, usually set in a grim line or a cruel smirk, was relaxed. His dark hair fell over his forehead, softening his sharp features. But the bruises were vivid in the daylight. A purple swelling on his cheekbone, a split lip that had scabbed over. He looked like a fallen angel who had lost a fistfight with gravity. Ivy carefully disentangled her legs from his. She needed water. She needed to check the perimeter. She tried to slide out from under the heavy wool blankets. Suddenly, a hand shot out. Jax didn't open his eyes, but his hand, large, scarred, and surprisingly strong, clamped around her wrist. "Don't go," he rasped. His voice was a wreck. It sounded like broken glass and gravel. Ivy froze. "I'm not going anywhere, Jax. I just... stay." He opened his eyes then. They weren't the clear, sharp eyes of the boss. They were hazy with pain and fever. But the intensity was there. The hunger. "Where are we?" he whispered, looking around the unfamiliar wooden ceiling. "The cabin," Ivy said softly, using her free hand to brush the hair off his forehead. He felt warm. Too warm. A low-grade fever fighting the infection. "You passed out. I drove us the rest of the way." Jax blinked, processing the information. He looked down at his chest, at the white bandages wrapped expertly around his shoulder, at the bruises. Then he looked at Ivy. He saw her bare shoulders sticking out of the blankets. He felt her bare leg against his. A slow realization dawned in his eyes. "You stripped me," he murmured. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips, though it looked painful. "I must have been out cold. Usually I charge for that." Ivy didn't smile. She pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. "You were freezing, Jax. You were going into shock. I had to use body heat." Jax's expression sobered. The joke died. He stared at her with a look of profound confusion mixed with awe. "You saved me," he said quietly. Again. Ivy looked away, feeling a sudden flush of shyness. "I need to check the bandages, and you need to drink water." She pulled her wrist free from his grip and scrambled off the sofa. The cold air of the cabin hit her instantly, making her shiver. She quickly grabbed her jeans and hoodie from the floor, pulling them on. She felt Jax watching her. Even wounded, his gaze was physical. It tracked her every movement. Ivy went to the kitchen area. She filled a chipped mug with water. She found the tin of coffee. It was old, but she found a rusted percolator and set it on the small gas stove. The hiss of the gas was the only sound in the room. She brought the water back to him. Jax tried to sit up. He groaned, his face turning gray as his abdominal muscles contracted. He fell back against the cushions, breathing hard through his nose. "Stop," Ivy commanded gently. "Don't be a hero. Your ribs are battered." She sat on the edge of the sofa. She slid her hand behind his neck, supporting his head. "Drink." She lifted the mug to his lips. Jax drank greedily. Water spilled down his chin, but he didn't care. He drained the cup. Ivy wiped his chin with her thumb. "Better?" Jax nodded slightly, leaning his cheek into her hand. His stubble scratched her palm. How long was I out? About 6 hours. 6 hours, he muttered, cursing under his breath. Silas could be anywhere. We need to move. We need to secure the perimeter. He tried to move again, pushing himself up with his good arm. Ivy pushed him back down. Her hand on his chest was firm. We are not going anywhere, Jax. You can't even stand. Silas doesn't know about this place. You told me yourself. No digital footprint. Jax grabbed her hand on his chest. He squeezed it. Silas is a dog with a bone, Ivy. He won't stop. He will burn the city to find us. He looked deep into her eyes. You should have left me at the warehouse. You should have taken the money and run. Why didn't you? Ivy looked at him. She thought about the safe room. She thought about the silence of the penthouse. Because I'm tired of running, she said simply. And because you owe me a paycheck. Jax let out a short, surprised laugh that turned into a cough. He winced, holding his ribs. Is that all I am to you? A paycheck? Ivy traced the edge of the bandage on his shoulder. No, she whispered. You're my monster. And I don't let anyone else break my things. Jax stared at her. His eyes darkened, the pupils dilating until the iris was almost gone. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the same electricity that had been there since the first night she danced. Come here, he said. I'm already here. Closer. Ivy hesitated, then leaned down. Jax didn't kiss her. He rested his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, breathing in her scent. Dust, sweat, and something sweet that belonged only to her. Thank you. He breathed against her skin. Ivy closed her eyes, letting herself feel the moment. For the first time, there was no power play, no debt, no contract. Just two people in a wooden box, hiding from the world. Suddenly a sound cut through the peace. A low mechanical rumble. Coming from outside. Far away, but getting closer. Jax's eyes snapped open. The tenderness vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, hard steel of the killer. He tilted his head, listening. An engine. Heavy. Not a sedan. A truck. Ivy pulled back, panic flaring in her chest. Is it Silas? Jax struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain this time. He swung his legs off the sofa. Maybe. Or maybe just a local. He looked at Ivy. Where is the gun? Ivy pointed to the table where she had left it. Jax grabbed it. He checked the clip. He looked at her. Help me up. Jax. Help me up, he barked. Ivy grabbed his good arm and hauled him to his feet. He swayed, his face pale, but he found his balance. He leaned heavily against the wall. Stay behind me, he ordered. He limped toward the door, the gun raised. Ivy grabbed the knife from the table. She didn't argue. She moved into his shadow. The sanctuary was over. The war had found them again. The sound of the engine grew louder. It was a guttural, grinding noise, like metal chewing on gravel. A heavy vehicle struggling against the mud of the forest track. Jax stood by the door, pressed against the rough log wall. He held the gun with his right hand, his left arm hanging uselessly in the sling Ivy had made. He was sweating. The effort of standing was costing him, draining the little color he had left in his face. But his eyes were clear. Deadly. Ivy stood behind him, clutching the kitchen knife. Her knuckles were white. She watched the door. The wood was old, weathered. One kick from a heavy boot, and it would splinter. She looked at Jax. He couldn't fight. Not like this. If it was Silas, if it was a hit squad, they were dead. The engine noise stopped. Silence rushed back into the clearing, heavy and sudden. Then the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. Thud. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots crunching on the wet leaves and gravel. One person, not a squad. Jack signaled Ivy with a sharp jerk of his head. Back up. Ivy took a step back, moving into the shadows of the kitchen. The footsteps stopped on the porch. The floorboards creaked under considerable weight. A pause. Then, a fist pounded on the door. 3 slow, rhythmic knocks. Bam, bam, bam. A voice, deep and gravelly like the earth itself, called out, "I know you're in there, boy. I saw the tire tracks. And unless you traded that fancy Italian suit for a tractor, you're stuck in the mud." Jax's posture changed instantly. The tension didn't leave his shoulders, but the murderous intent faded slightly. He lowered the gun a fraction of an inch. He looked at Ivy. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "Open it," the voice grumbled, "before I freeze my ass off out here." Jax didn't move to open it. He nodded at Ivy. Ivy hesitated, then stepped forward. She unlocked the deadbolt. She pulled the door open, keeping the knife hidden behind her leg. Standing on the porch was a bear of a man. He looked to be in his 60s, with a thick beard the color of iron and snow. He wore a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, dirty overalls, and a trucker hat pulled low over suspicious eyes. Ideally, he should have been holding a shotgun. Instead, he was holding a plastic grocery bag. He looked at Ivy. He didn't seem surprised. He looked her up and down, unimpressed. "You must be the reason he's alive," the man grunted, "because Jax doesn't have the sense to come in out of the rain." "Who are you?" Ivy asked, tightening her grip on the knife. The man pushed past her, walking into the cabin as if he owned it. Which, Ivy realized with a start, he might. He saw Jax leaning against the wall, pale and bleeding through his bandages. The old man stopped. He looked at the blood. He looked at the gun in Jax's hand. "You look like hell, kid," the man said. "Hello, Elias," Jax rasped, holstering the gun. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his legs giving out. Ivy rushed to him, helping him sit. She looked up at the stranger. "Elias, is he a friend?" she asked Jax. Jax closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the logs. "He's the caretaker. He looks after the property. He used to work for my father, before he grew a conscience." Elias snorted. He walked to the kitchen table and dumped the grocery bag. Cans of soup. A loaf of bread, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a bottle of whiskey. "I didn't grow a conscience, Jax. I just grew tired of burying bodies." He walked over to Jax, kneeling down with a surprising agility for his size. He reached out and pulled the bandage aside to look at the wound. Jax hissed, his hand grabbing Ivy's knee in a reflex of pain. "Nasty," Elias muttered. "Through and through?" Ivy nodded. "The bullet went straight through. I cleaned it, but you're a dancer, not a surgeon," Elias finished. He looked at her hands. "I saw the calluses, and the way you stand. First position, right?" Ivy stared at him. "How?" "I watch people, girl. It keeps me alive." Elias stood up. "Get the whiskey, and the needle from that sewing kit on the shelf. We need to stitch this properly before infection takes his arm." For the next hour, the cabin became an operating theater. Ivy held Jax down. There was no anesthesia, just the whiskey. Jax drank half the bottle. The other half Elias poured onto the needle and thread. When the needle pierced his skin, Jax didn't scream. He bit down on a leather belt Elias had given him. He stared at the ceiling, his body rigid, sweat pouring off him. Ivy wiped his forehead with a cool cloth, whispering to him, "Look at me, Jax. Focus on me." His eyes found hers. They were anchors in the storm of pain. He held her gaze while Elias worked, sewing the torn flesh back together. It was intimate. Brutal. Ivy felt every flinch of his body against hers. She felt his pain as if it were her own. When it was finally over, Jax passed out again. This time it was a deep, exhausted sleep aided by the alcohol. Elias covered him with the blankets. He stood up, wiping his bloody hands on a rag. He walked to the porch. Ivy followed him. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. Elias lit a cigarette. He offered the pack to Ivy. She shook her head. "He loves you, you know," Elias said, looking out at the dripping trees. Ivy wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. He hired me. Then he bought me. I don't think love is the word. Elias laughed. Smoke billowed from his lips. Jax Blackwood is a cold son of a bitch. I've known him since he was a boy. He never cared for anything that wasn't money or revenge. He pointed a callous thumb back at the cabin door. He let you see him bleed, girl. He let you see him weak. For a man like him, that's not just love. That's surrender. Ivy looked back at the closed door. She thought about the note. You ruined me. She thought about the way he looked at her in the car. What happens now? Ivy asked. Silas will find us. Elias dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. Silas is a loudmouth. He's messy. But he has an army. He looked at Ivy. If you stay here, he will find you. In a week. Maybe 2. You can run. I have a truck. I can get you to Canada. And Jax? Elias shrugged. Jax stays. He won't leave his city. He'd rather die on his throne than live in exile. Ivy felt the cold settle in her bones. She could leave. Right now. Elias would take her. She could disappear. Be safe. Be free. She looked at the dense forest. At the path to freedom. Then she looked back at the cabin, where her monster lay sleeping. She remembered the promise she made in the car. The Queen is coming. We're not going to Canada, Ivy said. Her voice was quiet, but hard as diamond. We're going back. Elias raised an eyebrow. Back? To the slaughter? No, Ivy said. She looked at Elias, her eyes flashing with a new, dark fire. Silas has an army, but armies need orders. They need structure. If we cut off the head, the body dies. You want to kill Silas? Elias asked, sounding skeptical but intrigued. I want to take everything from him, Ivy corrected. His money, his reputation, his allies. And then, I want Jax to pull the trigger. She turned to Elias. You worked for his father. You know the secrets of the Blackwood Empire. You know where the bodies are buried. Literally. Elias smirked. Maybe. Ivy stepped closer. Help us. Help us take it back. And Jax will give you whatever you want. Elias looked at her for a long moment. He saw the fear in her, yes. But he also saw the steel underneath. He chuckled. I don't want money. I want to see Silas's face when he realizes he lost to a cleaning lady. He spat on the ground and extended his hand. You got a deal, girl. But we need a plan. And we need guns. Bigger ones than that pea shooter you have in your purse. Ivy shook his hand. It was rough, like sandpaper. We have a few days while Jax heals, she said. Teach me. Teach you what? Everything, Ivy said. How to shoot a rifle. How to use a knife properly. How to think like a Blackwood. Elias looked at the cabin door, then back at the determined young woman in front of him. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth. Well then. Welcome to boot camp, Your Majesty. Recovery is a slow, boring beast. For a man like Jax Blackwood, who lived his life at 100 miles an hour, stillness was a form of torture worse than any bullet. He lay on the leather sofa, propped up by pillows that smelled of dust and Ivy's hair. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls. It was day 3. His fever had broken in the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. The pain in his shoulder was no longer a screaming siren. It was a dull, throbbing ache that reminded him he was alive. He stared at the ceiling beams. From outside, the sound drifted in. Crack. A pause. Crack. Gunshots. Rifle fire. It wasn't the erratic, panicked firing of the warehouse. It was rhythmic, controlled, deliberate. Jax closed his eyes. He could picture it. He could picture Ivy standing in the mud, her feet shoulder-width apart, her cheek pressed against the cold stock of Elias's hunting rifle. He could picture the way she held her breath before the trigger break. He had created this. He had taken a girl who danced in the moonlight and turned her into a soldier who shot in the rain. The guilt sat heavy in his chest, heavier than the bandages. But mixed with the guilt was something darker, something primal. Pride. The door opened. A gust of cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of dead leaves and gunpowder. Ivy walked in. She looked different. Her hair was braided back tightly, keeping it out of her face. She wore one of Elias's old flannel shirts over her hoodie, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms smeared with gun oil and dirt. She didn't look like a cleaning lady. She didn't even look like the girl in the red dress. She looked like a survivor. She propped the rifle by the door. She kicked off her muddy boots. She walked straight to him. "Hey," she said softly, her voice raspy from the cold air. Jax watched her. "Hey yourself. You're getting better. I heard the spacing between shots. You're breathing properly now." Ivy nodded. She sat on the edge of the sofa, or what had become his sickbed. "Elias is a hard teacher. He made me run laps around the clearing until I threw up. Then he made me shoot while my heart rate was 180. "Good," Jack said. "Shooting at paper is easy. Shooting when you're dying of exhaustion is the reality." Ivy reached out. Her hand, calloused now, rougher than it used to be, touched his forehead. "No fever," she noted. Her touch was cool, grounding. She moved her hand down to the bandage on his shoulder. Time to change the dressing. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't hesitate. She reached for the scissors on the table. Jax watched her work. 3 days ago she had cried when she saw his blood. Now, she cut away the gauze with steady hands. She inspected the angry red, puckered skin of the entry wound without flinching. She cleaned it with saline, applied the antibiotic ointment, and taped fresh gauze over it. Her efficiency was terrifying. And beautiful. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her eyes focused on the tape. "Only when I breathe." Jax lied. He reached up with his good hand and captured her chin. He forced her to look at him. Her eyes were darker. The innocence was gone, replaced by a steeliness that matched his own. "You don't have to do this, Ivy," he said quietly. "Elias can drive you to the border tonight. You can still leave. You can still be normal." Ivy pulled back slightly. She didn't look away. "Normal," she repeated. She looked at her hands. The hands that had scrubbed floors for minimum wage. The hands that had held a gun to a man's head. "I was never normal, Jax. I was just asleep. You woke me up." She leaned in, her face inches from his. "And I'm not leaving you. We finish this. Together." The door banged open again. Elias stomped in, carrying a dead rabbit by its ears. He threw it on the kitchen counter with a wet thud. "Dinner," the old man grunted. He looked at Jax. "You look less dead today, boss." "Good. Because we need to talk strategy." Elias grabbed a roll of paper, an old map of the city, and spread it out on the coffee table, pushing aside the medical supplies. Ivy moved to sit on the floor by the table. Jack sat up, gritting his teeth against the pain, leaning forward. "Here is the situation," Elias said, pointing a dirty finger at the map. "Silas has the docks. He has the police commissioner in his pocket. And he has your penthouse. He thinks he won." "He thinks I'm dead," Jax corrected. "Or running. He will be getting sloppy. Arrogant." "Exactly," Ivy said. She traced a line on the map. Jax looked at her. She was looking at the map with the same intensity she used to look at a dance routine. "He controls the money," Ivy continued. "But he doesn't know the codes to the offshore accounts. Only you know them, Jax." Jax nodded. "That's why he didn't kill me instantly at the warehouse. He needs the encryption keys. So we starve him," Ivy said. She looked up at Jax. "We don't attack him physically. Not yet. We attack the wallet. If we can get to the server farm in Jersey, the secondary backup, we can lock him out of the accounts. We can freeze the payroll for his soldiers." Jax raised an eyebrow. He looked at Elias. "Did you tell her about the Jersey servers?" Elias chuckled, pulling a knife to skin the rabbit. "She asked the right questions, kid. She wanted to know where the money lives." Jax looked back at Ivy. "A server farm heist. It's not a dance, Ivy. It's a fortress, armed guards, biometric locks. I know, Ivy said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Elias said you have a backdoor program, a skeleton key for the system. I do, Jax admitted. But you need to be physically inside the server room to plug it in. I can get in, Ivy said. How? Jax asked, skepticism coloring his tone. You can't shoot your way into a data center. Ivy smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made her look exactly like him. No, but they hire a cleaning service. She pointed to herself. I still have my old uniform in the trunk of the car, Jax. Nobody looks at the cleaning lady. Remember? Jax stared at her. It was brilliant. It was poetic. The very thing that had made her invisible, the thing she hated, was now her greatest weapon. Silas wouldn't be looking for a cleaning lady. He would be looking for a ghost. He leaned back against the sofa, ignoring the throb in his shoulder. He looked at Elias. Can she do it? Elias paused his work with the rabbit. He looked at Ivy. She's got steady hands. She can pick a lock. And she knows how to handle a knife if things go south. He shrugged. She's ready, Jax. The question is, are you? Jax looked at Ivy. He saw the fire in her, the determination. He realized he wasn't protecting her anymore. He was unleashing her. Okay, Jax said. He reached out and took the map. We hit the Jersey servers tomorrow night. We freeze his money. Then, when his army leaves him because they haven't been paid, we go for the head. Ivy nodded. She stood up and walked to the kitchen to help Elias. Jax watched her go. He saw the way she moved. Efficient, silent, lethal. He remembered the girl who danced alone in the dark ballroom, dreaming of a fairy tale. That girl was gone. In her place was a queen who was ready to burn the kingdom down to save her king. And Jax Blackwood, the man who feared nothing, felt a shiver run down his spine, because he knew that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a man with a gun. It was a woman with a plan and nothing left to lose. The industrial park in New Jersey was a graveyard of concrete and steel, bathed in the sickly orange glow of sodium streetlights. It was 2 a.m. Ideally, the world should be asleep, but data never sleeps. Elias's old pickup truck rumbled to a stop in the shadow of a warehouse 2 blocks away from the target, the Citadel data center. The engine cut out, leaving a ringing silence in the cab. In the back seat, Jax adjusted the laptop balanced on his knees. The screen's blue light illuminated his face, casting deep shadows into the hollows of his cheeks. He looked better than yesterday, but pain still tightened the corners of his eyes every time he moved his left arm. He tapped a key, bringing up a schematic of the building. The shift change is in 3 minutes, Jax said, his voice low and focused. The night crew is lazy. They don't check IDs thoroughly for service staff. But the bioscanners on the inner doors are real. Ivy sat in the passenger seat. She was staring at her reflection in the side mirror. She wasn't wearing the tactical gear or the red dress. She was wearing gray, polyester, shapeless, scratchy. It was a spare uniform she had kept in the trunk of the car, a relic of a life she thought she had burned. The logo on the chest pocket said, Spotless Solutions. It smelled of cheap lemon detergent and humility. Ivy ran her hands over the fabric. A week ago, this uniform felt like a prison. Tonight, it felt like a cloak of invisibility. Are you listening? Jax asked, looking up from the screen. Ivy turned to him. I'm listening. Shift change, lazy guards, bioscanners. Jax studied her face. He saw the tension in her jaw. He reached out, his hand squeezing her shoulder over the rough fabric of the uniform. You don't have to do this, Ivy. We can find another way. No, we can't, Ivy said firmly. Silas pays his soldiers every Friday. That's tomorrow. If we don't freeze the accounts tonight, he keeps his army. If the money stops, the loyalty stops. She checked the earpiece hidden under her hair. Can you hear me? Loud and clear, Jax said. I'll be with you every step. I'm your eyes. Elias is your getaway driver. You are the ghost. Ivy nodded. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale coffee and old leather inside the truck. She opened the door. The night air was cold, biting at her exposed skin. She walked to the back of the truck and grabbed the yellow cleaning cart Elias had acquired earlier. The wheels hit the pavement. Squeak, squeak. The sound was nostalgic. It was the soundtrack of her old life. She pushed the cart toward the massive steel gates of the data center. She didn't skulk in the shadows. She didn't run. She walked right down the middle of the floodlit path, head down, shoulders slumped. The posture of someone who is overworked and underpaid. She reached the security booth. A guard, bored and drinking an energy drink, slid the glass window open. "ID?" He grunted, not even looking at her face. Ivy held up the laminated badge. It was fake, printed by Jax on a portable printer in the cabin, but it looked real enough under the bad lighting. "Cleaning crew," she mumbled, adding a tired sigh to her voice. Someone spilled coffee in Sector 4. Again. The guard glanced at the badge, then at the cart full of mops and buckets. He saw exactly what he expected to see. A nobody. He buzzed the gate open. "Go ahead." Ivy pushed the cart through. "I'm in," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Good." Jax's voice crackled in her ear. It was a warm, grounding presence in her mind. "Proceed to the employee entrance on the west side. The code for the keypad is 7741. Ivy followed the instructions. She moved through the corridors of the building. Inside, it was freezing. Server farms are kept at sub-zero temperatures to keep the machines from overheating. The hum was deafening, a constant low-frequency drone of thousands of fans spinning at once. It sounded like the inside of a beehive. She passed 2 technicians in lab coats. They didn't even blink. To them, she was part of the furniture. The power of being invisible, she thought. Left here, Jax guided her. The main server room is at the end of the hall. This is the hard part, Ivy. There's a guard stationed at the door. Ivy turned the corner. There he was. A large man sitting on a folding chair, reading a magazine. He had a gun on his hip. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the handle of the cleaning cart until her knuckles turned white. "Just keep walking," Jax whispered. "Don't hesitate. You belong there." Ivy pushed the cart forward. The wheels squeaked loudly on the linoleum. The guard looked up. "Hey, you can't be in here. Restricted area." Ivy stopped. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. She pulled a crumpled work order from her pocket. Another fake. "Look, buddy," she said, her voice nasal and irritated. "I got a ticket here that says the AC unit in server room B is leaking condensation on the floor. You want me to clean it up, or you want to explain to your boss why $1 million mainframe short-circuited because of a puddle?" The guard frowned. He stood up, looking at the paper. "I didn't hear about any leak." Ivy shrugged. She leaned against her mop bucket, looking bored. "I get paid minimum wage to mop water, not to argue with security. You want me to go? I go. But when the smoke starts coming out under that door, that's on you." She started to turn the cart around. The bluff was a gamble. A massive, terrifying gamble. "Wait," the guard sighed. He swiped his keycard on the reader. Beep. The heavy door unlocked. "Make it quick. I don't want you touching anything." Ivy didn't smile. She just nodded and pushed the cart inside. The door closed behind her with a heavy magnetic thud. She was in. The room was a cathedral of technology. Rows and rows of black towers stretched into the darkness, blinking with thousands of tiny blue and green lights. The noise was louder here, a physical vibration in the air. "I'm in," Ivy whispered. "I see you," Jack said. He had hacked into the internal cameras. "Go to row 12, rack 4. Ivy counted the rows. The cold air bit through her thin uniform. She found rack 4. She reached into her bucket. Inside the mop wringer, wrapped in a plastic bag, was the flash drive. She pulled it out. She found the USB port on the main console. She plugged it in. On the small screen of the server, text began to scroll rapidly, green code cascading like a waterfall. Upload started, Jax said. His voice was tight with tension. We need 2 minutes. Just hold tight. Ivy stood there, pretending to wipe a non-existent spot on the floor with a rag. 2 minutes felt like 2 years. She watched the percentage bar on the screen. 20%, 40%. Suddenly the door opened behind her. Ivy froze. It wasn't the guard, it was a technician, a man in a white coat holding a tablet. He stopped when he saw her. "Who are you?" he asked, frowning. "There's no leak reported in this sector." Ivy turned slowly. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. The upload was at 60%. She needed to stall. "My supervisor sent me," she said, keeping her head down. "I am the supervisor," the technician snapped, "and I didn't send anyone. Let me see your badge." He walked toward her. He was going to see the fake ID. He was going to see the flash drive plugged into the console. "Jax," Ivy whispered. "Stall him," Jax hissed. 10 seconds. The technician reached out to grab her arm. Ivy reacted on instinct, the soldier instinct. She didn't punch him. That would raise the alarm. She tripped. She threw herself forward, colliding with the technician, flailing her arms. She knocked the tablet out of his hands. It hit the floor with a loud crack. At the same time, she kicked her own bucket over. Soapy water flooded the floor instantly. "Oh my God," Ivy cried, playing the clumsy fool. "I'm so sorry. I slipped," the technician shouted, jumping back to avoid the water, looking at his shattered tablet. "You idiot! Look what you did!" Ivy fell to her knees, grabbing towels, frantically wiping his shoes, creating chaos. I'm sorry. She looked up at the server screen. 99%, 100%. Upload complete. "Get out, Ivy," Jack shouted in her ear. "Now!" Ivy scrambled up. "I'll go get more towels," she yelled, grabbing her cart. She sprinted toward the door before the technician could process what had happened. She burst out into the hallway. The guard was there. "What's going on?" "She spilled the bucket!" the technician yelled from inside. "Get her name! I'm going to get the wet vac!" Ivy shouted, pushing the cart past the guard, moving fast. She didn't stop. She turned the corner. She abandoned the cart in an alcove. She ripped off the gray shirt, revealing a black t-shirt underneath. She shoved the ID into a trash can. She walked calmly but quickly toward the exit. "Just keep walking," Jack said. His voice was breathless. "We have the accounts. They are frozen. Silas is broke." Ivy pushed through the emergency exit doors. The alarm triggered behind her. A loud, rhythmic siren. But she was already outside. The cold night air hit her face like a kiss. She ran toward the truck. Elias already had the engine running. She jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door. "Go!" she yelled. The truck peeled away, tires screeching on the asphalt. Ivy slumped back in the seat, gasping for air. She was shaking. Jax reached forward from the back seat. His hand, warm and solid, grabbed her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "The transfer is confirmed. Every account linked to Silas Blackwood is locked. By morning, his men will be walking off the job." Ivy turned to look at him. She saw the relief in his eyes, but she also saw the awe. She pulled the earpiece out of her ear and tossed it on the dashboard. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. "That was the easy part," Ivy said, her voice dark. She looked out the window at the disappearing city. "Now that he's alone, we go for the kill." The Blackwood Tower stood like a black needle piercing the dawn sky. Inside the penthouse on the 40th floor, the silence was deafening. There was no music tonight. No party. No clinking of champagne glasses. Silas Blackwood sat on the same leather sofa where Jax used to sit. He was holding a bottle of whiskey, but his hand was shaking so badly the liquor splashed onto his expensive trousers. The room was empty. His guards were gone. His advisors were gone. At midnight, when the transfer of funds failed and the accounts showed zero, loyalty had evaporated like smoke. Silas was alone, the king of nothing. The elevator chimed. Ding. Silas flinched, dropping the bottle. It rolled across the floor, spilling amber liquid onto the white rug. He fumbled for the gun on the cushion beside him. He raised it toward the doors. They slid open. There was no army, no SWAT team. Just two people. Jax walked out first. He was wearing his ruined tuxedo trousers and a clean black t-shirt that stretched tight over his bandaged shoulder. He looked battered, bruised, and exhausted. But he walked with the terrifying calm of a man who has already won. Beside him walked Ivy. She wore black jeans and a dark jacket. Her hair was loose, framing a face that had lost its innocence but gained a terrible kind of beauty. She didn't stay behind him this time. She walked beside him. Equal. "Hello, brother," Jax said softly. Silas laughed. It was a broken, jagged sound. "You're supposed to be dead. I killed you. In the warehouse." "You tried," Jax corrected. He kept walking, ignoring the gun pointed at his chest. "But you made a mistake, Silas. You forgot that I don't fight fair." Jax stopped 10 feet away. Silas's eyes darted between Jax and Ivy. He looked wild, paranoid. "Where are my men? Why aren't they answering?" "Because checks don't bounce in my world, Silas. But they do in yours," Jax said. "Ivy froze your assets. Every cent you stole from the company. It's gone. You can't buy loyalty anymore." Silas turned his gaze to Ivy. His eyes narrowed with pure hatred. "The cleaning lady?" He spat. "I should have put a bullet in your head the moment I saw you." Ivy stepped forward. She didn't flinch. She looked at the gun in Silas's hand, then up to his eyes. "You could have," she said calmly. "But you didn't see me. You never saw me. Just like you never saw the people you stepped on to get here." She took another step. "That was your mistake. You thought I was trash to be thrown away. You didn't realize I was the one holding the match." Silas roared, raising the gun higher. "I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you." Jax didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He just looked at his brother with pity. "Look at you, Silas. You're shaking. You've never pulled a trigger when the target was looking back at you. You're a coward." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. His knuckles were white. "I am the king," he screamed. Bang! The shot rang out, but it didn't come from Silas's gun. Silas gasped, a look of total shock freezing on his face. He looked down at his chest. A small red bloom was spreading on his white shirt. He looked up at Jax. Jax hadn't moved. His hands were empty. Silas crumbled. He fell to his knees, then slumped forward onto the rug he had stained with whiskey. The gun slipped from his fingers. Silence rushed back into the room. Ivy turned. Standing in the open elevator doors was Elias. The old caretaker held a smoking revolver in his hand. He lowered it slowly. "I told you, kid." Elias grunted, stepping into the room. "I grew tired of burying bodies. But for this one, I'll make an exception." Jax walked over to Silas. He checked for a pulse. He stood up. "It's over," he said. He turned to Ivy. The adrenaline that had held him together finally snapped. His shoulders slumped. He looked around the penthouse. His empire, his prison, his home. It felt different now. The air wasn't cold, because she was there. Ivy walked to him. She didn't care about Elias. She didn't care about the body on the floor. She wrapped her arms around Jax's waist, burying her face in his chest. He held her. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in, shaking slightly. "We survived," she whispered. Jax kissed the top of her head. "No," he murmured. "We lived." Epilogue 6 months later. The balcony of the villa overlooked the Amalfi coast. The sea was a deep, impossible blue, glittering under the Italian sun. It was a long way from the gray skyline of New York. Ivy stood by the stone railing, holding a glass of wine. She wore a white sundress that fluttered in the warm breeze. Her hair was longer now, lighter from the sun. She looked peaceful. The shadows under her eyes were gone. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a weapon. She knew that tread. Jax wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up. The scar on his shoulder was a silver line now, a permanent reminder of the war they had fought. The tattoo on his neck stood out stark and dark against his tanned skin. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her back. Ivy leaned into him. "I was thinking about a mop," she admitted, smiling, "and a bucket, and a girl who thought she was invisible." Jax turned her around. He looked down at her. His eyes were no longer abysses of darkness. They were warm. Possessive, yes, but loving. He took the wine glass from her hand and set it on the railing. He took her hand. He began to hum. A low, deep melody. "Wicked game." "Dance with me, Ivy," he whispered. "Here? Now? Without music?" Jack smiled. The dangerous, beautiful smile that had started it all. "We don't need music. We make our own." He pulled her close. Ivy kicked off her sandals. She stepped onto his feet, just like she used to dream of doing as a little girl. They moved together in the golden light of the afternoon. A slow, gentle sway. No anger, no fear, no desperation. Just two broken pieces that had fit together to make a whole. Ivy rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart. She remembered the night in the penthouse, the cold floor, the fear. She had been just the cleaning lady, and he had been the monster in the shadows. But as Jack spun her around, laughing softly as her dress twirled in the wind, Ivy realized the truth. The monster didn't destroy the girl. He gave her a kingdom. She looked up at him. "I love you, Jax." Jack stopped dancing. He cupped her face, looking at her like she was the only star in the sky. "I worship you, Ivy." He kissed her, and for the first time in the history of the Blackwood family, there was no war, no pain. There was only the dance,